northbound Tri-State. You see mild delays from the Hinsdale Oasis to 47th, and between the Reagan Tollway and the Eisenhower. Northbound Lakeshore Drive is tight, 18th Drive to Roosevelt. Kennedy, 22 minutes, O'Hare to downtown. The Ike, 30 minutes from 390. That's traffic. I'm Jim Calamonte on AM 560, The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next in our AM 560 Weather Center. Our meteorologist, Steve Williams.
Nice day today. Times of clouds and sun. The high today at 81. Patchy clouds tonight, low 66. Partly sunny day tomorrow, the high 83. Partly sunny Sunday, shower or thunderstorm in the afternoon, the high 82. I'm Steve Williams on AM 560, The Answer.
Partly sunny and 69 at O'Hare. Next news at 7:30. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. And the exchanges between Attorney General Barr and House Judiciary Committee Democrat Socialists this week couldn't have been more instructive in terms of understanding which side thinks the police and federal law enforcement are the problem associated with the rioting and violence in America's big cities, and which side thinks that it's the people committing acts of violence that are the problem. And one of the exchanges, before they got into that wonderful discussion about whether Attorney General Barr would be allowed a 5-minute bathroom break, when they were actually talking about substantive things, was Nadler's concern about the deployment of federal law enforcement and Barr's concern about things like, I don't know, a courthouse in Portland being burned down.
Have you discussed the current or future deployment of federal law enforcement?
Well, as I say, I'm not going to get into my discussions with the president, but I've made it clear that I would like to pick the cities based on law enforcement need and based on neutral criteria.
So, but you can't tell me whether you discussed...
No, I'm not going to discuss what I discussed with the president.
Can you...
Is protecting federal property, and specifically U.S. courthouses, which are the heart of federal property in all 93 jurisdictions in the United States. And we have the obligation to protect federal courts, and the U.S. Marshals specifically have been given that obligation. Federal courts are under attack. Since when is it okay to try to burn down a federal court? If someone went down the street to the Prettyman Court here, that beautiful courthouse we have right at the bottom of the hill, and started breaking windows and firing industrial-grade fireworks in to start a fire, throw kerosene balloons in and start fires in the court, is that okay? Is that okay now? No, the U.S. Marshals have a duty to stop that and defend the courthouse, and that's what we are doing in Portland. We are at the courthouse defending the courthouse. We're not out looking for trouble.
Meanwhile, in Portland, according to Andy No, reporter who's local, Andy No, who was beaten almost to death by Antifa several months ago. We talked to him on our show. According to a law enforcement source, he tweeted, there have been 22 homicides in Portland since the 1st of June. In all of 2019, there were 36. Last month, the mayor there, Ted Wheeler, dismantled the gun violence reduction team because he and others said it was unfair to blacks. 22 homicides in the last 60 days in Portland after 36 in all of 2019. But
that says something.
But those big city mayors who were all experiencing a spike in violent crime, including in Chicago, they all have it under control. They've got the problem identified, federal law enforcement. Meanwhile, the left can't even decide to work in conjunction with one another, even the professional agitators, as Wall of Moms and Black Lives Matter are now sparring over identity politics of all things.
And those Wall of Moms are, ooh.
I'm a single mom, and I work full time, and I have to come and spend my nights with you because I can't stand in my own streets and say Black Lives Matter.
I got to tell you, that woman is indistinguishable from most of the members of the House Judiciary Committee, most of the Democrat Socialist members. She sounded exactly like Representative Jayapal, as far as I could tell. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Ken Cuccinelli. He is the Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security. Deputy Secretary Cuccinelli, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you. We'll try and keep the screaming to a minimum here.
Thank you.
Yes, yeah, I'm sure you appreciate that.
We're more reserved.
With respect to Attorney General Barr's testimony, to the extent he was allowed to testify at that House Judiciary Committee hearing, I thought he laid it out pretty simply that federal law enforcement is there to protect federal property. The Constitution is very clear on the topic of the chief executive of the federal government enforcing federal law. So it's a bit confusing as to exactly the concerns of the Democrat Socialists.
Yeah, certainly people should know that, frankly, most House hearings go like that. You saw more press on this one because it was the Attorney General, who, by the way, is particularly good at pointing that out, as you also observed. But most House hearings are basically, they each get 5 minutes, and that means their time and the answer to their questions, and they basically just yell at you and lie at you. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of the 5 minutes, they have this phrase, I take back my time.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm convinced they've come up with this phrase because it means nothing by itself. And because what they're saying is you don't get to answer, you don't get to talk, but they don't want to be on camera saying that. So they have cooked up this phrase, I take back my time, to literally keep those of us who show up to provide insight, truth, and from talking. And the Attorney General, I think, made that pretty clear over the course of his, quote, hearing, unquote.
Yeah, the scream fest. So what do you say to critics who say DHS is acting outside of its jurisdiction in Portland?
Well, there, the Attorney General quite simply got it right. And I'll be basic. I'm a constitutional guy. Article 1, Section 8, paragraphs 1, 9, and 18 are the constitutional basis, and they, Congress, passed a law directing the Secretary of Homeland Security to protect federal facilities, over 9,000 of them. The courthouse is one among them. You heard the Attorney General speak to the fact that marshals are responsible for courthouse protection. The way that works is they're responsible for inside the courthouse, and a little-known agency in the Department of Homeland Security called the Federal Protective Service is responsible for protection on the outside. They work together, of course, but FPS is also responsible for thousands of other federal buildings, including the Edith Green building right near the courthouse that's been under attack in Portland. So that's the mission. We're just there pursuing the mission, and as the violence and the numbers escalated, FPS needed more officers backing them up, and so we sent them. It's really just that simple, but they never got outside that federal mission. We weren't there enforcing Oregon law or Portland law, if they have any laws in Portland, and we were just sticking to the federal mission. And we do go off property, so if you assault a federal officer, right, we'll go find you wherever you are, and to enforce that law.
Tell me about these Shining Path death squads that you're operating that are pulling people off the streets in unmarked vehicles to take them away to black sites for, I assume, torture, that I've understood from the characterization of some members of Congress.
Yeah, the members of Congress who actually know what's happening and yet come say something else when these are their federal officers who they've directed to be there. You're referring to the controversy around the video about two CBP agents detaining an individual and departing the area in an unmarked van.
Yeah, the gray van.
What you don't see but what you don't see before that video begins is the 1 or 2 block foot chase. After the two officers had identified themselves to the individual as federal agents, and then he took off running. They identified themselves to him is because it was believed that may have matched the description of someone who had assaulted 2 federal officers only an hour before. So he took off running. They ran after him. Eventually, he stopped running at the courthouse, ironically enough. He ran to the courthouse. And that's where the video begins, where they calmly detain him. And you can kind of hear in the background the noise and you can get a sense of the dangerous situation. So that's why they got in the van. They drove a short distance away. They had a conversation determining that he was not affirmatively that he was not the person that we were looking for the assaults, and was released. And all that took place in under 10 minutes. So the uniforms identify who they are. They verbally identified who they are. Every law enforcement organization in America uses undercover vehicles, and particularly with these riots, you have noticed how marked police vehicles have been targets for explosives and burning down, including with officers in them. So the use of unmarked vehicles is just a safety feature that allows us to do our job correctly. That's what's called a Terry stop. It was conducted correctly, and he was released when they determined that he wasn't the defendant.
Okay. Do you feel like you've been vindicated somewhat by this agreement between the federal government and the state of Oregon, Governor Kate Brown there, that she will send the state police in as a backstop to local law enforcement, and while those federal law enforcement officials that are on the ground will stay as a backstop to the backstop, she's essentially conceded the point that what's happening in Portland is not being addressed by the local officials, so she will send in the state police. It seems to me that says something about the work that the federal law enforcement officials were doing and the reason they were doing it.
Yeah, there's no question. We've been asking for this for weeks, including with direct contact, not just, shooting things through Twitter. But and the conversations this week were productive, as you can see. And last night, in the I told you so category, that with joint policing that started early in the day, there was no violence last night. There was littering, there was shaking the fence, but there was no assaults on officers. There were no serious assaults on the courthouse and so forth. So what we've been saying all along was vindicated last night, and we appreciate the governor finally advancing the Oregon State Police. It's too bad she had to, because Portland wouldn't allow their police to actually, police the areas around the courthouse. But that's going in the right direction. We'll see how this weekend goes. But this is exactly the kind of cooperation that we have in the rest of the country. Even, you all are in Chicago. The president and the mayor have certainly had their words. But the fact of the matter is we continue to work at the professional level with your police department and on a variety of projects to keep Chicago safe. And that's the way it works around almost the entire country except Portland.
So there hasn't been any other, yes, the public posturing I get, but in terms of the working relationship that you're describing, not Jenny Durkin in Seattle, not de Blasio in New York, not Lightfoot in Chicago, as you were just mentioning. Everywhere else you're getting cooperation and you're able to operate freely with local law enforcement?
Yeah, we have our issues. For instance, with New York, their statutory bar of information for our immigration enforcement. That's one issue. But when it comes to just straight up violence, whether it's from gangs where DHS has some of the most important expertise in the country, or drug enforcement with DEA, et cetera, there's broad scale cooperation.
What about for the DNC next month in Milwaukee, with all the local law enforcement agencies pulling out of participating in the security because of the protocol that the Milwaukee City Council has put in place regarding dealing with crowds that could become violent?
Yeah, that'll be interesting to watch. Having been to a number of conventions, that police presence is important. It really is. I don't think you can really pull off a convention without an active police engagement because of the attraction of protesters that happens. And it's both parties. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just a point where demonstrators know they can get their attention.
Right.
But with the path of demonstrations this year and so much acceptance by the left of violence in the right alongside traditional and protected protesting. That makes for a very difficult and dangerous situation. And frankly, there's a little bit of reaping what you sow going on there. We want peace, and we want everybody, regardless of how crazy their views might be, to be able to express those views peacefully. But when it crosses the line into violence or threats of violence, that's where law enforcement does need to step in. That's what DHS has been doing in Portland and a couple other places in the country.
But there's no plans for Milwaukee for the DNC at this point.
Well, it's a major national event, and we will have some of our own security there for protection. But in terms of the local effort and state and local effort, that remains to be seen.
He is Ken Cuccinelli, Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security. Deputy Secretary Cuccinelli, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Take
Good
care.
to be with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's what Chicago is talking about. It's Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy on AM 560. The Answer.
The end of a committed relationship is among life's most stressful episodes. The time when you must rely on someone who will look after your best interests and those of your children. That's why people turn to the Illinois chapter of the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers, the leading association of peer-approved family law attorneys. They are the best of the best. Fewer than 150 divorce lawyers in Illinois have passed the Academy's rigorous vetting process, and each has at least a decade's experience in family law. A family